Let me ask you a question. Out of all the Zelda games, which one would happen to be your favorite? Well, you see, that's just the thing. If this question were to be asked to multiple people, you would almost certainly end up with a different response from each individual. The Legend of Zelda is a franchise unlike any other. Its level of innovation is nearly unmatched in the gaming industry, as every title truly thrives to be its completely own, unique experience. Ultimately, that fact right there is one of the biggest reasons people tend to dislike Twilight Princess. After the reception that The Wind Waker received for its cartoonish art style, Nintendo really had no choice at that point if they wanted to save the Zelda franchise. So in order to please the fans, they constructed something that is such a 180 spin in the other direction from The Wind Waker, as the art style, characters, and theming are marketed towards an entirely different demographic from before. All of this culminated in an experience oddly reminiscent of Ocarina of Time, meaning the fans got exactly what they desired at the time. Well, how does Twilight Princess hold up after all these years? Let's find out. So this game opens up way differently than all of its predecessors. Rather than waking up from a nap, like Link usually does, he's talking to Russell, the swordsman of the village. Link is immediately established as a hard worker, and he seems much more mature than any of the previous iterations of the character. As everyone knows, Twilight Princess receives a ton of flack for its absurdly long opening and introduction, and with great reason. I can understand this drawn-out tutorial for those who have never touched a Zelda game before, but for someone who's played this game multiple times, the thought of having to replay this part can completely steer away returning players. Personally, whenever I think about starting up a new save file, I dread the fact that I will have to sit through an hour of unnecessary cutscenes and pointless tutorials on how to herd goats, fish, use a slingshot, and use a sword. Each Zelda game has its own gimmick, and this time around it's Wolf Link. This is the definition of a great idea gone terribly wrong. This new edition comes with a slew of issues, most notably with the Tears of Light. In each region of the map you are required to collect numerous Tears of Light by hunting bugs, of all things. This would have been cool if used maybe once, but overall, this concept gets old extremely fast, and the worst part is you're stuck in this form until you collect every tier. And only after clearing the region from Twilight are you returned to Link's Hylian form. Perhaps the biggest missed opportunity here was the combat used for Wolf Link. Since he turns into a literal beast, you'd think there'd be more options at bay for you to pull off. But there's not. You literally just get a spin move and a basic bite attack. It would have been nice if there was a finishing blow for Link's wolf form rather than just his human form. For example, after knocking an enemy down, you could have jumped on top of them and ripped them to pieces, and oddly enough, you can actually do this with the pose, so it just serves to make the whole situation more confusing. However, Link in his regular state actually has a greater variety of attacks than ever before. These come in the form of Howling Stones, which you first need to find with Wolf Link, then howl in order to cause the hero shade to appear in different locations of the map. This is a really cool idea, as each move grants you tons of unique ways to take on enemies and serves to make the combat much more enjoyable. I especially like the last move taught to Link, the Great Spin Attack. This allows you to inflict double the damage upon any enemy as long as you have full hearts. It feels incredibly awesome to completely annihilate enemies with this move, and the other skills you learn are great as well. My other complaint with this is that unfortunately, these moves are optional, which means the enemies don't possess any proper form of defense, leading to very easy encounters throughout the game. If these were made mandatory, more room for interesting battles could have been opened up, thus giving more incentive to find these secret skills. And as for the enemies themselves, none of them are too interesting, as this is one area where the game's art style really suffers. I actually like the more realistic look given to Twilight Princess, but unlike The Wind Waker, it doesn't hold up that great. Some of the enemies here that were in the previous game, such as the Bokoblins, look absolutely terrible compared to how they used to. None of the characters or enemies really have any emotion, and even when they are trying to be expressive, the art style just doesn't allow it. However, one area where the art style really shines is the Twilight Realm. As mentioned earlier, this is where you go bug hunting with Wolf Link, but besides that, the atmosphere here is unlike anything ever seen before or after this game, with the possible exception of the depths from Tears of the Kingdom, which seem to take heavy inspiration from the Twilight Realm. For starters, the music used here fits the mood perfectly. It feels so digital and just doesn't sound right when listened by a human ear. The developers pulled off something quite impressive here, as it truly feels like you're in a totally different universe once teleported to the Twilight Realm. The enemies down here are also a parallel of most enemies from the Light World, which creates an even more unsettling atmosphere. To this day, I have never felt more uncomfortable in any area of a Zelda game than I feel every time I enter the Twilight Realm. It really is an unforgettable experience. Twilight Princess contains 9 dungeons, which is a big step up from the Wind Waker, not only in quantity, but also in quality. These all feel like bigger versions of Ocarina of Time's template, with a few brand new ones thrown into the mix. None of these are bad in the slightest, and after coming off of Majora's Mask, which only had 4 dungeons, along with the Wind Waker, which contains some of the weakest in the series, it's a massive breath of fresh air, getting to experience something similar to Ocarina of Time again. See, one of the biggest complaints towards Twilight Princess is how it is basically just Ocarina of Time 2.0 or whatever, but last time I checked, that is literally the highest rated video game of all time. So is it really such a bad thing that Twilight Princess adopts many of that game's attributes? There are also lots of new items hidden within these dungeons, which are tons of fun to use. The Dominion Rod translates statues to life, and getting to just destroy everything in your path with this is probably the most satisfying feeling in the entire game. My favorite item by far is the double claw shot, which you obtain from the city in the sky. This is such a simple yet brilliant addition that enhances the environment tenfold. In my opinion, the best part of all these dungeons is how unique they are. None of these even remotely resemble each other, and as far as atmosphere goes, these are probably the best in the entire series. The Palace of Twilight is so ethereal and unsettling, and there's a few parts in there where a giant Zant hand chases you, and it is seriously one of the most anxiety-inducing feelings you will ever find in a Nintendo game. Snow Peak Ruins is a dungeon that takes place inside an old, worn-down mansion that a Yeti couple inhabit. In turn, this is one of the most memorable dungeons in the franchise for many due to its unparalleled environment. However, this level of quality seen in the dungeons is not carried on throughout the entire game. Hyrule Field is fun to explore at first, but there are plenty of things to do here that usually come down to digging into a hole, collecting a random heart piece, or grabbing a golden bug. Speaking of which, these golden bugs are one of the main collectibles in Twilight Princess, and their whole purpose is to satisfy this character named Agatha, who is creepily obsessed with bugs. The main issue here is that every time you give her any bug, she in turn gives Link rupees. The problem later comes down the line when you realize that your wallet isn't big enough to fit all these rupees in. So what does Agatha do? She gives you the upgraded wallet size after obtaining all the bugs in the game, which is completely pointless by that part of the game. I just don't understand it. But one thing I'm very glad returns is the grottos. These are such a minor thing, but if you've seen my Wind Waker video, then you know how much I adore the grottos simply because they produce some of the most atmospheric locations I've ever seen in a video game. Each Zelda title puts a spin on the grotto theme, and Twilight Princess's iteration of it is just as perfect as the Wind Waker's. But anyways, one thing that is universally praised about Twilight Princess is Link's companion, Midna. To this day, she is still considered to be the very best companion that the Zelda franchise has ever seen, and this is completely warranted. She has her own goals, and the only reason she even tags along with Link in the first place is because she wants to use him to restore peace to the Twilight Realm. Midna shows zero compassion towards Link's situation as a wolf, or to the Light World. She even taunts Link by pretending to be his friends. This selfish attitude is why the ending pays off so well. Throughout the entirety of the game, you're helping Midna search for things. First it's the Fused Shadow, then the Mirror of Twilight, but progressively you start to see her character change and become more sympathetic of Link. In the end, she wants to help both the Light and Twilight worlds, and this mainly stems from her hatred of Zant, who is the self-proclaimed ruler of the Twilight Realm. The great part about all this is that we get to see just why she loathes Zant so much. He nearly kills her halfway through the game, but not only that, he's the one responsible for transforming her into the imp form we see for the majority of the adventure. Many have said that this game feels more like Midna's journey rather than Link's, and I couldn't agree more. It really does feel like Link is just tagging along for the whole thing, and not really gaining much from it. Which is honestly totally fine. Every other Zelda game is about Link's journey to save Hyrule, and while that concept is still very much present here, it's nice having Minna as a change of pace from the usual formula. But though this may not seem like Link's adventure, it doesn't stop Twilight Princess from being one of the most epic Zelda experiences of all time. And I truly mean epic. This game is absolutely enormous, and if there's one thing it pulls off better than any of its predecessors or successors, it's making you feel like a true hero. The soundtrack is bombastic and triumphant, and everyone looks up to Link and wants to be just like him. All the kids back in his hometown adore him and want to learn everything he knows how to do. Even right at the beginning, they beg Link to let them use his wooden sword. And I know it's just an excuse for the tutorial, but it's actually really heartwarming seeing them all admire Link's skill with the slingshot and sword. This adds a great sense of community and passion to the game, so while Midna may be dragging you all around Hyrule to collect her trinkets, at least you're rescuing the people of your village in the process. Adding to this, another thing I love is Link's character design. Why am I talking about this? Well, because for one thing, I find it very weird how just about every character in the game looks, well, yeah, not the greatest. The attempt to make the art style realistic just dated the game hard. The environments look amazing, but some of the character models here look straight out of a PS2 game. This brings me back to Link. His model actually looks incredible along with Princess Zelda, and these two iterations of the beloved characters are actually some of the favorites among fans. I just find it weird how in a world of ugly character models, we get Link and Zelda who look nothing short of amazing this time around. You'd think with the HD version they would have updated or at least slightly tampered with some of the models, but that's not what happened at all. In fact, Twilight Princess HD probably is the least enhanced out of all the Zelda remakes. There was definitely a lot of work put into the textures here, and if you really pay attention to how these textures used to look, you can see how much of an improvement there was. Unfortunately, there really isn't that much of changes added to the base game. There are a few welcome fixes, such as the Tears of Light requirement being reduced and the climbing speed being increased, thank God, but in a way, some may look at the lack of changes as a blessing, because if they had tried something crazy, it could have ended up worse than the original. For example, with the remakes of Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask, and The Wind Waker, lots of people have pointed out that the enhanced lighting system actually destroys the game's original atmosphere. While I don't agree with this, I can definitely see where they're coming from. However, I feel like if any game really needed a graphical overhaul, it was Twilight Princess. But in the end, the HD version still looks great, and I'm just grateful we got it. Now Nintendo, please just port these remakes to the Switch. Good lord, it's been long enough. Aside from that, I'm going to talk about my absolute biggest issue with Twilight Princess, that being the sudden reveal that Ganondorf was behind everything. Like seriously, do we need Ganondorf in every Zelda game? He looks awesome this time around, but that doesn't change the fact that he just shouldn't have been included at all. The whole thing just comes across as jarring because the whole time we are led to believe that Zant is the main enemy here, and the ultimate goal is to defeat him. It seems like the only reason Ganon is even here is because the Zelda team was panicking about the fact that everyone wanted the Zelda game exactly like Ocarina of Time, which obviously had Ganondorf in it. In the end, Zant should have just been the only villain, as not only would this have distinguished Twilight Princess from the rest, but it would have given much more room to flesh out Zant's character rather than just revealing that he was a weak-minded individual used as a pawn in Ganon's plan the whole time. However, one thing I actually like is the final encounter with Zant. I think it's actually very understandable when he completely loses his mind and goes crazy in the end. His lust for power has become so strong that he literally can't even control himself anymore. That's why I don't agree with people when they say that this part ruined his character. I personally think that what ruined his character the most was the introduction of Ganondorf, honestly, as I stated earlier. If I had to choose between Ocarina of Time and Twilight Princess, well, to be honest, I really wouldn't know. Since this game is so frequently compared to Ocarina of Time, I think it's only fair to compare the two and see what things each one did better. In terms of overworld, I think we can all agree that Twilight Princess succeeded much more. However, it doesn't really seem fair to critique Ocarina of Time for this due to the fact that it was the very first 3D Zelda game. So obviously the hardware wasn't as advanced as something like the GameCube, which is what Twilight Princess originally released on. But what about dungeons? Well, in this case I have to give the edge to Twilight Princess, but only because I find the puzzle solutions to be more creative. That being said, Ocarina of Time had absolutely genius temples and I adored every single one. So as you can see, we aren't really getting anywhere here. And that's because when it comes down to it, these games are both very unique from one another. Sure, they may share a lot of the same core concepts and themes, but at the end of the day, playing Twilight Princess is a vastly different experience from Ocarina of Time, and they are both incredible in their own distinctive ways. So in the end, The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess really does stand on the shoulder of giants, and it would be unfair to put this game down for not living up to its hype because, in my opinion, it most certainly did. This is such a massive adventure full to the brim with emotion, engaging mechanics, and bold new ideas. Midna is most likely as close to perfect as we're ever going to get from a companion, and that ending cutscene with her actually manages to be very emotional and well set up throughout the entire game. You really do feel like a hero who was once just a simple farm boy. Getting to experience Midna's change of heart and desires, along with Link's rise, is nothing short of fascinating, and these stories are why I adore the Zelda franchise so much. As much as I love Twilight Princess, I'm glad it never got a direct sequel like The Wind Waker, because unlike that game, I feel like everything here was able to be experienced in one beautiful package. And on top of that, the story ends on a perfect note, leaving Link and Midna to protect their respective worlds. Next up on the list is the very controversial Skyward Sword, so I hope you have a great day. Thanks for watching.